Hey, everybody, Dave here. Hope you're having an awesome day. So, when I was at DesignerCon back in November of 23, we had our 1M Robots booth, and these two guys came up to my booth, and they were asking some questions about the robots. Now, there had been a lot of people around, and we've done really well with the robots, but these two guys were asking very specific questions, and I was like, there's something different about these guys, but I can't put my finger on it. And then one of the guys was like, hey, I'm a creative director at Bungie, and I want you to be part of a Destiny video game art show that we're going to be holding in LA, New York, and London. I was like, what? My buddy Christian was there, and he was like, he loves the game. He grew up on it. So this build, I've been working on this for about 3.5 months. And when I got my ghost, they sent out a ghost to all the artists. Right away, I knew exactly what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be kind of this crawler walker thing, but I wanted to blow it out of the water. I'll be totally honest, when I made the ghost, in my mind, I thought, I want to make something so cool that Bungie will say, how come this is not in our game? Now, I understand that that's probably not a reality, but I wanted to build something that epic and that amazing. And I knew it was a little bit out of my limitations because I can't do CAD work. I don't know exactly how to do 3D files. So I knew I was going to need to do some 3D printing. So I called in a couple of my buddies, and you'll get to meet them in the video, Christian and John. They were amazing. We put pencil to paper, sketched out some ideas, and I think we came up with a pretty epic build. And at the art show, it was a huge success. It was really, really well received, and it was a lot of fun. So it's in LA right now. It's going from LA to New York, and then after New York, it's going to London, and then they're going to auction it off for their charity at Bungie. So again, I hope you enjoy this video, and let's get to it. This was a super fun build because I got to work with my coworkers that are industrial designers and to put pencil to paper and think through sketches and concepts. And this is actually John's prosthetic arm, his hand. It's a robotic hand. It's super cool. So we're looking at the mechanisms of that, playing with some sketching, playing with the base and how all this is going to come together. And this was kind of my idea of the leg. And so John took that idea just from sketch and started working out some of the details of this. And then to understand the size and the scale, I just took some clumps of clay because I knew I wanted the base to be kind of this pile of rubble. And then the crawler is going to be kind of digging through the rubble. So I just used some popsicle sticks and crumpled paper and just glued it together. And it gives a really nice concept of what we need to work with. Now, when figuring out, like, how do I cut the bucket? How do I make a line? I don't know. I'm just figuring things out, solutions, and I literally just taped my blade onto the top of this container and just used it as a guide. And then once it got thin enough, I was able to cut through. And this is kind of the base and the size that I'm thinking it should be. I actually purchased a Lazy Susan at Michael's. And then this is just like a wood plaque that you can get at a hobby store. And I'm trying to build this base. And I have the idea that I sketched out already. I'm going to use these bolts, and I'm going to drill through and try and hold, kind of sandwich the bucket in between those two pieces so it will all hold together. Now I'm drilling a hole through the side of the bucket because I found these really cool little plumbing parts that I'm adding on here, and I just wanted to run like a tube of liquid running around just to give it this cool, almost like something's pulsing through this whole diorama. I'm using some little hose. It's just a clear tubing, and I attached it with these little brackets. Bolted them through the backside. That looks pretty cool. So all I'm doing here is just drilling some holes through my Lazy Susan. I ended up, at the very end of this build, I removed the Lazy Susan just because the piece is so big and I didn't want people rotating it around and it falling and breaking. So, but it came in handy as I was building because I was able to rotate things around pretty easily. What I did there was I just marked the end of the bolt and dropped it down, and I had paint on the tip. That way I could mark where to drill my holes. So I got everything drilled, putting the bolts in, and then I'll slide the bucket over the top there. And I did mark this bucket front, back, left, right, so I can always get those bolts in the same exact spot because they are specific to where I drilled it. But that actually worked out pretty nice. Kind of just beat the top piece on there and then put on some washers, and I'll bolt it down. Now, originally I was thinking I probably got to figure out how to cut these bolts off, but it actually ended up in my favor because I'm going to actually build out a styrofoam rock base. Now, I used a heat knife, but it ended up too warpy and melty, like a planet surface. So instead, I started carving and cutting and breaking because I want it to look like broken concrete. Now, I did a complete tutorial on this kind of mess up between a Mod Podge and a concrete. So I'll leave a link for that video below. So I'm not going to go through the whole detail of how I made these rocks, but I did do styrofoam, a concrete powder, a couple washes, dry brush. Again, check out the link for this video below because this is a pretty good tutorial if you need to make some concrete slabs. I'm doing a little bit of sanding and scuffing up. Now, I did rough sanding, and I'm just scratching and gouging in there because I want a whole bunch of scratches and textures. Hitting this with a primer. I'm going to go ahead and hit the base with a primer. Now, I didn't have to paint the whole thing because the bucket's covering most of that. And then I hit it with a silver, and you can really see all those scratches and gouges. Again, I wanted this to look like a really rough piece of metal, just aged and weathered. So here's a little bit of weathering medium called AK Rust Streaks, and I like the grunginess of this. And then I'll use a little bit of this Vallejo Rust. I really like this stuff as well. I'm kind of just dabbing it on, wiping it off, and kind of going back and forth and really laying this texture on. And if you've seen any of my videos, you know I love to do this kind of stuff, putting it on the hose there just to grime that up. I even took a silver chrome pen and kind of re-added some metal highlights on there so it looks like metal's shining through. Now, I had this really bright fluorescent paint in there in the tube with some water, and it looked amazing. And to cap this tube off, what I did was I stuffed cotton, super glue, and then cured it with a resin tip, and that worked really well. It held super nice, but overnight, all the paint settled, and it ended up looking milky. So I ended up just using water and green food coloring. I get a cool translucency that works. So here's John holding one of our mock-ups. We just cut this out of styrofoam, and we're trying to figure out the size and scale, and then kind of holding the ghost up to it and getting in there and seeing how that works. So that's kind of fun to work through these processes. So as John's working on the rendering for that, Christian helped me make this model for the Destiny logo, 3D printed that, painting it up. Now I got this down and dirty rust, and this stuff is super cool. It's not cheap, but it is amazing. It actually activates and kind of turns into a rust type material. So I'm kind of figuring out how far I'm going to take this. I felt like that was a little too much. I do love this, but it's a little too much. So I took some silver, kind of dry brush over the top, and it really gave a nice kind of grungy look coming through. Now I'm kind of just measuring and getting it centered in between the two pipes. I got some tape there just holding it so I can figure out where I want it to be. I actually did a little pencil line around it, put some super glue on there, and then we'll slap this bad boy on there. And I think once you start to see this come together, it's kind of mind-blowing how cool this looks. And it's kind of fun to tell people when I was at the show, like, yeah, this is a bucket. And they're like, what? So, yeah, this turned out really cool. John sent over some CAD files. We started printing all the components. Now, these are the legs. And he separated them out into a bunch of pieces, which meant a ton of sanding, but the way it's all engineered, it just goes together so nice. Here I am, I sprayed a gold on there and then the brown. I'm trying to just figure out the paint scheme. And then once I figure this out, I'll kind of carry this whole same paint scheme through the whole body. So here we are, we got back together and started talking through the connection of the leg and how are we going to work these little joints that will connect to the ghost itself. And then we're trying to also figure out the size and scale of how big these things need to be, how long. So that's kind of what we were doing there. I was then playing with the layout of the structure of the stones, and then started into the weathering of the legs and the ghost itself. This part is kind of scary because you put all this work into all the sanding and the cleaning and getting it perfect, and then you start to trash it. So, again, if you've seen any of my videos, I love to use different types of washes. This is just shoe polish, a brown shoe polish. And on top of the gold, it gave a really, really nice Vex color scheme. If you're not familiar with the Vex, it is kind of this patinaed brass kind of look. And so before, when it was just the bright gold, it was like, ooh, that's a lot. But once you put that wash on there, man, it looks so good. Here I am just adding a little bit of detailing of chipping and trying to pull out those highlights. Then taking the rust and just adding, again, just a little tiny touch. And you can see the bottom piece has not been weathered yet, and the top piece has been, and those are really, really nice effects. I went ahead and did a little bit of shoe polish on the brown part just to kind of add that same color and texture. And you can see the backside was not weathered and then weathered. All right, for the base, I ended up rebuilding this whole thing because I redid my concrete blocks, but I wanted to show you how all the pieces slid over the bolts, and I didn't really have to cut anything off because it fit right in. And here's just a bunch of additional parts that we were 3D printing. I started sanding all those down. We had this foot here, and that was the original foot, but we were like, it needs a little bit more characteristics, and so we looked at the Vex itself and had this cool design there. And I think this ended up being a lot nicer and really tied it in to the Vex even more. Here I am. This is kind of just showing a little bead of super glue and started kind of composing all the parts together. It clicks together really nice, really super happy with how it turned out. Again, it was so fun to send videos to the guys, and everybody was just freaking out about how awesome it's turning out. We wanted to have little claws that we're going to be digging through, so here's kind of the layout of the 3D printed claws. They're all painted up. This is a connector joint for the legs. We ran a rod through the inside of that. Here's a connector part that will connect to the main part of the leg. And again, John helped kind of engineer all these little pieces where even like the claw spins back and forth, and I've got that metal rod, and we actually just slid the rod through, and then I just ran the peg through the top there, and it held it all together. Now I couldn't cut the rod with a saw, but a little pipe cutter here cut right through there. This is just kind of fun, showing all the little details, the way John broke out the file, so I could actually paint all these pieces super easy. So that was much appreciated. Here what I'm dealing with is just some different tubing and piping and kind of the structure of the arm and how we put it all together. This larger tubing kind of went through the middle, the smaller tubing actually acted as post to help hold everything together. And you can see the leg is really flexible, and we kept it flexible so once we got it into place, we could get it posed, and then we'll glue it into that shape so it will not move. Here I've got like a little 3D printed cap. I'm just gluing that on there, and this actually helped hold everything together. Now from here, all of the prints have been mine, but now here's the ghost. So I actually started drilling holes and making mount and brackets for this, but I'll tell you, it was super scary to just go right in on their super clean ghost that they sent me and start gouging it and messing it up. But I had to do it because I really wanted this to look like it had been through, you know, it's like burning through space and just all this weathering on it. And so here it is, painted gold, weathering, exactly how I did the legs, painting all the center parts a dark brown. We came up with these cool little vent pieces because we wanted to give the ghost just a little bit more dimension. So we did these little vent pieces, and then there's a set that goes on the front and then another set that goes on the back. I think they turned out great. This was one of Christian's concepts and ideas. I've had that eye masked out the whole time, and I didn't know exactly how to do it, and so I'm not super confident with the airbrush, but I was like, let's go for it, so I just busted it out, and I did watch quite a few Warhammer painters and how they get their glows. and they do some beautiful work. So here I am doing some final assembly, and I've got a little bit more work on this, but we're going to wrap this up, and I want you to meet Christian and John, and we're going to just talk through a little bit of how we worked on this project together. All right, that was a super fun build, and we're super close to wrapping it up. I have a few final touches to do, but before we go any further, I wanted to introduce John and Christian. They were a huge help to me. There are things that I know how to do, but then there are things that I don't know how to do, so I have kind of asked these two guys to help me. They're both industrial designers. They understand CAD and setting up things for 3D printing. So Christian, can you kind of give us some insight on how we came up with this concept of what we were even going to build with the Ghost?
Yeah, the concept. Well, really, you had that first vision when you brought us together. I grew up playing the games, you brought us in, and you're like, okay, I got this Ghost shell. What if it had something really unconventional to the games, like, I don't know, a pair of legs, some arms coming out of it? And I'm like, hold up, that does not happen in the game. They fly. There's no reason they need legs. And rather than be pessimistic about it, really what we came to terms with was, well, what's the story as to why it has legs? What's the story as to why it's doing and looking this certain way? So as we got into it, in the game, the ghosts are connected to this overall larger character called the Traveler. They are infused with light, and that gives them kind of their powers overall. What we were looking at is, okay, well, what if it got disconnected from that higher power? It's found by one of the enemies, in this case, the Vex, and it was repurposed in a different way. Really, one, to match their aesthetic, but it's also incorporating their parts. I think what was really interesting about that story is it also ties into what you do on YouTube, where you're taking found objects, you're incorporating them into a completely new build, and you're seeing how all those components work together. So it's a layered story, and it also brings purpose as to why you're building it as well.
Yeah, and the Vex has really great design language. It tied really nice into the Ghost shell itself. And so what happened was the three of us got together and we started sketching. We did it multiple nights. We got together and we started just sketching out ideas. And I had kind of this rough idea of what I was thinking in my head. And then this is the cool thing about working with other designers and artists is you can hand it to somebody. And John took it. He's like, "Oh, I think that night you like sent me images. You're like, hey, what about something like this?" I was like, dude, like, relax. No, it was awesome. And so, John, can you kind of talk through the legs and like how you worked out those details and what we did there?
Yeah, so as an industrial designer, we're really well trained in design language. That's the overall look and feel that you have on a product that allows you to recognize it as a specific brand that it is. So applying that methodology to this type of a thing was incredibly fun. It was all creativity, just, definitely a different feel than the normal daily grind that we can sometimes go through as industrial designers. So we identified the Vex as the kind of character in the game that we wanted to go after. So I started looking at specific elements of the Vex, the shaping, the way that the parts come together, the little details, those little like nuances that kind of separate it and add those nice little features that really bring it to life. So first we need to figure out scale. So
I think originally the first one, like they were like gargantuous, and I was like, I don't know if that's gonna work.
Yeah. So CAD vision is something we talk about a lot, where you're working and you're zoomed in on something and you're building in 3D. I work on a 48-inch OLED screen, which is crazy, but I've gotten used to it. I really like it, but that means that I can go either way. I can go like really tiny, where it's like I'm so focused on a little detail, it ends up you don't even see it, or you can go the other way.
And I think what happened is you sent the giant leg, and then I was like, oh shoot. So I think I took aluminum foil and I crumpled a ball, and I took a piece of styrofoam and some chopsticks and like flour wire, and I built like a little like to scale so you could visualize, because you were like, I'm not sure what am I supposed to be doing here. So I think I sent that over to you that night.
Yep.
And then you were like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it was the aluminum foil ball, chopsticks, and it looked like it was on a pile of sandwich food.
Yeah.
Like Dave was making a sandwich, and he, just decided to start making this and piled it on top.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really funny. But you do whatever you can to try and get a quick result. So that was the first step, and then going like to the next level, we kind of identified, we like a specific shape. So we did a lot of sketches. Let me jump back. So we had, these really like much more detailed sketches that have these mechanical elements incorporated in them. But then again, we wanted to get the scale right. So Dave actually just quickly knocked this out in 2D. And then I think I grabbed just some scrap foam and some painter's tape and just like taped it together to start to get a little bit of like this kind of wedge shape. So that was something that we felt like we could, carry through the features of this design.
And like after you print the first piece, Christian set up all the files to throw on the 3D printer, and I remember printing it out, sanding it down, putting it together. It wasn't even painted or anything, and I literally was like, it's so cool. I showed pictures and I brought it to work the next day and showed these guys, and they're like, the exact same reaction was just like, it's so good looking. I can't wait to do this. So
yeah, and one part, I've got almost 20 years of industrial design experience, so I've been doing this a long time. I made a lot of parts, a lot of prints, but it always feels good when things actually like come together the way that you plan. It doesn't always happen on the first pass. Sometimes it's way off. So it's good to go like kind of quick and get that result so you can adjust and adapt and refine your design.
And John made these little claws, and so these are going to be kind of, at the end you'll see these. They're going to be attached underneath, and this little guy is going to be digging around in here, grabbing this thing. So tell us a little bit about this, Christian, really quick.
Yeah, so in the game, there's all sorts of weapons. I think that's one of the most iconic parts about Destiny is the types of weapons, the lore behind them. This just so happens to be an exotic weapon, iconic to the game, called the Gallery Horn. So we decided on that, and we have a little bit of this wolf head poking out of the rubble, so that this Ghost has identified something valuable, something iconic to the game. Especially if you've played it, you know that this is something like super rare, super important. You know the history behind it, and if you don't, again, it's gold. You know it's valuable.
yeah. And the cool thing is it gives him more purpose. Like he's actually digging around, clawing. So I couldn't have done it without these two guys, and this is part of being a maker, is sometimes knowing your limitations, and if you have to reach out and like work with other people, do it, because it can make an amazing project. And I think this thing turned out great, so let's do some turnaround shots of this thing. And as always, it's a great day to be a toy nerd. Have a good one.